Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend Graham Dorn. Graham, we've got some monster mini golf coming our way after our Chuck E. Cheese date yesterday. But more importantly, Michigan State tonight. Can't wait for that one. But it's SEC. We got to talk SEC Friday. And you just debuted your new little graphic, wins above Mountaineers. Now, is that Wham or is it WAM?
I'm going W.A.M because it's much more fun to say W.A.M. So throwing out W.A.M. Basically, what I'm thinking is the West Virginia Mountaineers missed in 2025 with what I think was a very strong profile. So if you're above where they were at this point last year, you should have absolutely no problem making the tournament. If you're below that, you're still possibly in pretty good shape, but maybe there's some concerns that maybe you're not quite as safe as you thought you might be.
And I mean, the big thing with West Virginia last year, right? By now, they had already gotten all of their best wins, and the committee devalued their wins early in the season when they had Tucker DeVries. So, yeah, if you're ahead where they are now, I mean, it's not like they gained really any ground from this point forward. So, I like the idea. Doesn't look good for Indiana. Well, they were like minus 1.24 Wham compared to the Mountaineers, but they got that big win the other night, and they're trying to make a comeback. What SEC teams did you have on there? Kentucky and Georgia, right? And they're both pretty close.
Yeah, Kentucky is actually a little bit above West Virginia, so it's funny because you hear all the talk about this Kentucky team is not what we thought they would be. They're really struggling. They're not competitive at times. They're still in great shape. If we were shocked that West Virginia missed out with all of their terrific wins already at this point last year, Kentucky should have no problem making the tournament. They would have to absolutely collapse not to make the tournament at this point. And Georgia was also on there. They were a little bit behind where West Virginia was at this point. But again, West Virginia missed with all their best wins behind them. So if you're even close to where West Virginia was at this point, you're probably feeling pretty good.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm surprised, and I'm going to pull the graphic or the spreadsheet up here. I'm surprised that Georgia was not further behind West Virginia because they really haven't gotten those quality wins yet this season. I mean, we'll get to them in the second half of this. We've been splitting it up. The teams that are pretty comfortably in the field, we'll touch on those first. Georgia not in this tier. Vanderbilt at the top. You wanted to touch on them a little bit. We both have them as our top team in the SEC. Certainly, I feel that if I had to pick, who's going to win the SEC tournament right now, I'm definitely picking Florida ahead of Vanderbilt. Probably several teams ahead of Vanderbilt. And I think that was kind of the point that you wanted to go with, that it doesn't feel like they should be a 3 seed.
Yeah, I think you look at the best wins. Alabama's a nice win, but that was at home. Wasn't a dominant victory. Actually, when that game happened, you and I were both saying maybe we had a little bit more respect for Alabama, just the way that they played with them on the road after that game. At UCF is a very nice win, but UCF is, for me, the last 7 seed. For a lot of people, an 8 or a 9 seed. St. Mary's is really the same deal. Like, that's like an 8, 9 seed caliber team. You start to look at it, and all of a sudden you're like, where are the great wins for Vandy? Like, I get Q1, they're 5-3. Q2, they're 6-0. Looks very good numerically, but when you really break it down, I don't see terrific wins for Vanderbilt. So they're really kind of on the back end of where I thought they could be, lower than their resume metric average, lower than their qualitative average. I just think Vandy needs to pick up some wins that really jump off the page, because right now it's starting to feel a little bit like a superior version of Louisville from last year, where you just start to wonder, like, hey, okay, everything makes sense numerically, but I want to see those really top-end wins. I think Vanderbilt still needs to pick those up.
Going to change the tab right now because as we're talking about Vanderbilt, it occurred to me they look a lot like BYU, just a team that hasn't gotten that marquee win. And we both have them seated a little bit below where the metrics have them, beating Clemson, Villanova, great. But where's that upper echelon win? They don't have that. And that's what Vanderbilt's lacking. They're 0-2. And even in that the Alabama game, Aiden Sherrill didn't play at all for Alabama. LeBaron Philon missed most of the second half, and Vandy still just barely won at home. Like, yeah, we were commenting when that game happened. Like it was weird how many people after that game were like, "Oh, okay, I believe in Vanderbilt now." And I was like, "This is the time you should be getting a little skeptical about Vanderbilt. This is weird, but they're still very solidly in. I mean, they're a lock, I think, at this point, but not a lock for a 3 or 4 seed, even as the top team in the SEC. It's a certainly the divide between the top of the SEC and the bottom is narrower than in any other league because even your Oklahomas and your LSU's are like competitive. There's no DePaul or Pitt or Penn State in this conference, so I think that does leave all of the bubble teams susceptible to probably picking up some questionable losses the rest of the way, but we'll see how it plays out. Speaking of teams that could fall out, I have an asterisk here on 24 Auburn because I wanted to remember to mention them that I think they are my highest seeded team that I could tentatively see falling out of the field, and that's not a knock on Auburn, but an acknowledgement of their schedule. They already have 7 losses, none of them bad. I mean, I think even at Missouri is a solid quad two result. Yeah, because Missouri's 76, so that's barely quad two, almost quad one. The home loss to Texas A&M. A&M is what 39, so that's near the top of Q2. So they haven't done anything bad. They just they have a very tough remaining schedule and they've already suffered 7 losses. I could see them like we wake up 2 weeks from now and Auburn is sitting there at 14 and 11 and we're wondering whether or not they're going to make the field. How confident are you in the Tigers?
I'm pretty confident in Auburn making the field, not necessarily because of anything Auburn's done or is projected to do. More than anything, I'm just looking at the bubble this year, and these teams
Yeah.
have nothing. Like you look at Indiana, they beat Purdue, but what is their second best win? I mean this legitimately. Like Marquette, like they've got nothing. And you look at Auburn, well, they won at Florida, they beat St. John's, they beat Arkansas. Like, how are you going to leave that team out? And I think this is just you've got to look at each team in reference to what their particular year is and where they fall. I think 24 seems a little high for me for the resume that Auburn has currently, but I think they're safely in the field because I just don't really see them falling too much behind teams that are, again, the Indianas of the world, the Missouris of the world. Missouri is another team that could potentially be competing with Auburn for a tournament spot. There's just so much ground to make up. Texas, another team Auburn just beat. Even if they have quality wins, their record is not nearly good enough for the strength of schedule they've played. So I just think Auburn's ultimately going to be safe because I think there's too much ground for any of the bubble teams to make up to pass them.
Yeah, I mean, they would have to crash and burn like Trey Young, Oklahoma style, and even then, to your point, they might still be a 10 seed just because there's not much meat on the bubble this year. I mean, it's slim pick. I couldn't believe some people put Indiana in, but then I'm looking at who I still have Texas in, and they don't freaking belong either. So yeah, for Auburn to fall all the way behind Texas would be tough. I just think they could end up entering the SEC tournament with 14 or 15 losses, and it's just going to be another case of everybody saying, "Oh, the committee loves the SEC." Yeah, it could just be one of those years. Anything else on this top tier that you want to hit on before we venture down into the bubble?
No, I just think it's really interesting that, at least for me, I ended up with Florida 17, Alabama 18, Arkansas 19, and Tennessee 21. And you were obviously very close to that, too. A lot of SEC teams in that range. I just think it's a good thing for the SEC overall because you're going to be, if you're a Missouri or you're a Texas, you're like, this is perfect. These are quad one games if I get them at home, but they're not teams that are number one or number four or number five overall. These are mid tier quad one teams. So they could potentially end up being quad 1A. If they're not quad 1A, they're reasonable gets at home. So I think you're going to see a lot of SEC teams make the tournament if they're on the bubble simply because they're going to stack up quad one wins. Whereas if you're a Big 12 bubble team, for example, it's like you got to get Houston or you got to get Arizona. Like it's tough to get those teams. Maybe a little bit easier to get in Arkansas or Alabama at home.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I do feel like the SEC is probably going to end up getting the most teams in, but also might not have a championship caliber team outside of arguably Florida. On our slight difference, I think I ended up with Tennessee. I just wanted them directly one spot ahead of Alabama because they had that road win over Alabama, and then ended up having the other things falling in place. But yeah, they're all like 5, 6 seeds as the second through sixth best teams in this league. Heading down to the bubble, we already hit on Georgia a little bit, but 0-1 against Quad 1A, and they have that Quad 3 home loss to Ole Miss. I think things could get very questionable for Georgia in a hurry. I don't think they're higher than 32nd in any of the metrics. Like everything points to them being 35 right about now. And I harped on Georgia early in the season as a team that really kind of was, gaming the system by just blowing out teams like Bellarmine and Morehead State. And I think now you're starting to see what they actually are, which is a bubble team that eventually needs to actually pick up a marquee win. They have what do they have in the next couple of days? Texas A&M tomorrow at home. I mean, that's a colossal bubble game right there. Call your shot. Who wins that one tomorrow?
I think it's Georgia, and I think it's one that they might ultimately end up needing. We've already talked about the wins above Mountaineers situation. Georgia, terrific record amongst Quad 1 and Quad 2 overall. But I was actually a little surprised. Joe Lenardi mentioned Texas A&M versus Georgia is just a seeding game. I'm like, I don't think it's just a seeding game. Like, we're still in January. Neither of these teams is so far above the bubble that they can't fall out of the bracket. Like, make no mistake, the winner of this game will be in very good shape for a tournament bid. The loser is still in decent shape, but they are not anywhere close to being safe. So I think it's a really important game for both teams, not for seeding as much as just making sure they're in the tournament.
I don't know how he worded whatever you're referencing there. I assume he meant a seeding game for now and not that both teams are locks. And I would agree the loser doesn't immediately fall out of the field, but yeah, the loser does then have a bit of a tougher road to hoe ahead of them. Like I just said, Georgia doesn't have that marquee win. A&M's only particularly great win was at Auburn. I mean, if you don't have Texas in the field, which you don't, and I just barely do, A&M only has one win over the field, and they lost all three of these losses in non-conference play were by double digits to Oklahoma State nowhere close to the field at home against UCF. Bubble team shouldn't lose at home to UCF. You shouldn't lose on a neutral to SMU if you're, the best team in the SEC, as the conference record currently indicates for the Aggies. I don't think anybody actually believes that about them. But the other big game for the weekend is Kentucky at Arkansas, if only because of the Calipari factor. But it's also huge just for Kentucky needing another quality win. Their third best win there you see is at LSU, who is it's a good net win, but LSU's not all that close to the conversation anymore. And I don't know how much it's going to matter that St. John's wasn't quite the same team, a month ago that they are now. How's that going to factor into the conversation? Also, the fact that Kentucky had Jalen Lowe and Jaden Quaintance for that game, and now they don't have Lowe for sure. We don't know if they're getting Quaintance back. I think they need a few more feathers in their cap, and a rivalry emotional win at Arkansas would be massive for them. What do you think if they win? Where would they end up? And if they lose, do they really fall much from their current spot right on that like 8-9 cut line?
Well, I don't think they fall much if they lose, simply because when I was putting this together, I was actually surprised they ended up with them all at 33. I thought they should be somewhere above that because I was thinking Tennessee wins, St. John's wins. Those are very nice, especially compared to a lot of the teams in that range. For example, we just talked about Texas A&M. How do they compare? I'm like, well, I think at Tennessee and St. John's sounds a lot better to me. So I was a little surprised they ended up that low. So I don't think they'd fall very much. But then it wasn't until I saw your graphic that I was like, well, actually, maybe I do feel a little bit more comfortable with where I have Kentucky now that I'm seeing a resume metric average of 33.3 and a quality average of 33. Maybe I was actually pretty close to where they should be because I was not thinking that way. I was surprised I had them that low to begin with. But I think if they win, all of a sudden the conversation turns for Kentucky, not to whether they're going to make the tournament, but how high of a seed they go. Because if you got that Tennessee win, Arkansas win, St. John's win, now you're naming teams that aren't just in the bracket, but you're naming teams that are competing for good seeds. So I think Kentucky should feel very good if they end up with a victory. But even if they lose, I don't really think they're dropping much.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't call them a lock if they win, but it would feel like it's going to take an absolute collapse for them to miss the field if they end up winning this game tomorrow. And we got to touch on Texas real quick, which I mean they're my last team in, and I don't like it. I don't even know who your last team is in right now, but I'm sure you don't like them either. I think this is a good quick snapshot of the state of the bubble heading into this weekend. Texas is 12-9, but they have those two great wins over Alabama and Vanderbilt. They also have hideous losses to Mississippi State and Arizona State. I think they are a classic bubble team in most years, but I can't quit them because they actually do have a couple quality wins, and most of the teams in that mix have just done nothing whatsoever. Um, I wrote down that you're close on Texas, but you sent me a gif of them getting thrown out of the field. How close are you actually to having the Longhorns in, or are they just like they've hit a point of losses where you're just not even going to consider them right now?
Yeah, well, I do think they're close, and they very easily could be on the field. Don't necessarily think you're off on that. What it came down to for me is I keep thinking of 2022 Notre Dame, who was
Hmm.
4-9 against quads 1 and 2, and we are just like, oh my gosh, like I don't care if they're second place in the ACC. How do you take a team that is 4-9 against quads 1 and 2, and we're very good against quad 3? Texas is 4-9 against quads 1 through 3, not 1 through 2, 1 through 3. They have, like, if Notre Dame was a surprise getting in against quads 1 and 2 there, to not have anything, and in fact, it's worse. They have a loss. Like, if they, it would be better if they hadn't played a quad 3 game. I just thought that was the loss accumulation was a little bit too much, but those wins. I mean, look, you want to compare them to some of the teams above them at Alabama versus Vandy, NC State. Those sure jump off the page. So Texas will be getting serious consideration if they're anywhere close to the bubble. I just think the loss accumulation is a little bit too much right now for me to have them in.
Yeah, and I excuse me, I'd love to put somebody else in. I just can't even justify it. I think I have Ohio State in at like 45 now. I'm close on if I take Texas out, I'm putting Santa Clara in, and I don't know that I believe that would happen. And it's not just because Texas controversially made it last year, but to some extent, we are trying to predict what the committee's going to do, and they've shown that they'll put in a garbage team from 12th place in a big conference ahead of the third best team in the West Coast Conference.
The one thing I think that Texas doesn't have quite yet that they could potentially down the road, what Texas last year had was 7 wins against quad 1. And obviously, we're not to the end of the season, but
Yeah.
where I think that matters is you can have 3 quad 1 wins. West Virginia had 4 wins against quad 1A last year. Like, they had really good top end wins. But then how far do you take that the rest of the through the way, right? Like, Texas, when you win 7 games against quad 1, that's not having a few good games. That's having a lot of good games. They don't quite have that yet for me when it's at 3. If they keep
Yeah.
the same profile through to the end of the season, I think they probably will actually end up making the tournament at that point. I just think when it's 3Q1 this far into the season, it's a little bit different than if you extrapolate that out to the end of the season. Maybe one game isn't quite so significant at that point.
So on that note, their remaining schedule, I mean, you see there the biggest three left at Arkansas versus Florida at Georgia. They also play at Texas A&M, and that's about it. I think their next 5 games are all either quad two or very low quad one. Oklahoma, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU, none of them in the field. So in theory, they should be 17-9 in a couple of weeks, but it's not going to do much to help out their quad one record. It'll help their 4-9 against the top three quads record, but even at that, they'll be 9-9 with not particularly great wins added to it. But yeah, I think they need to add some girth at some point, but we'll see if they can get there or not. I just thought it'd be fun to talk about somebody smack dab on the bubble before we get a crazy Saturday of insane bubble results. That'll be it for now. We got to get ready for a little bit of putt putt. Again, Michigan State tonight, 8 o'clock. Everybody's going to be watching that one. Until next time, take care and enjoy the hoops.